Welcome to another episode of Screw the Clout. We have another amazing guest. I mean, we've been getting guests from all ends of the spectrum, and one more interesting than the next. Today on our show, we have Dr. Mireya Mayor, who has a great story. I don't want to say unusual story, but again, I'm excited to go down how this came to be. So, Dr. Mireya, how are we doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. And I would probably say it's unusual.
Well, again, it kind of is, and that's what attracted me, and that's what we always look for. But sometimes I say that, and the guest is looking at the guest looks at me like, "Wow, it's not really that unusual." So, I like to give that a little bit. But
Fair enough.
most of our audience, just so you know, again, are entrepreneurial, in the entertainment business, looking for advice that might be stuck in all aspects, whether they're directors, makeup artists, uh, you know, any part, any aspect.
I feel you. Yes.
Again, you're an interesting story because you're kind of doing what you love. And again, you're technically a director, just in a different with a whole different spectrum. So, with that being said, how did you get into? Is this something you always wanted to do, as far as being a filmmaker or a director? And let's go from there. And did you have the support of your family?
Sure. I mean, so to be clear, I'm not a director at all. I'm on camera talking about different animals and wildlife. I became National Geographic's first wildlife correspondent at
But
a
what I'm
time
saying, well, again,
where, yeah,
I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. So,
okay.
when I say a director, again, you're the personality, but do you have say on each particular episode, or is it just something that they tell you when you go?
No, so I'm not scripted. I mean, I think part of what makes me unique on TV is that I get to play me, right? And the
Right.
reason that I get put on these shows is because I come with a long history of not just television experience, but expertise as a primatologist, working with different animals all over the world, particularly primates. So I don't get a script, which I love because I don't generally like to be told what to do.
Sure. Sure.
But I get to speak really from the heart and from experience, and I think that's what's really resonated with people and what's made me sort of unique in the world of science communication is that I'm not just sort of a muppet for what somebody else wants
Sure.
to
No.
have out
And
there.
and that's what I find pretty amazing. So growing up, um, were you into primates, or was it just an animal thing in general, and it kind of focused towards that, or how'd that come to pass?
Sure. So, growing up, I grew up in a big city in Miami, Florida. And in particular, I grew up in an area called Little Havana. My
Mhm.
parents are Cuban immigrants. My mom is really overprotective, if you know anything about Cuban mothers. And so, when I asked if I could join the Girl Scouts, she was like, no way, that's too dangerous. So,
Oh, that's
I
great.
had no sort of real thoughts about going off into the wild and studying animals, but I was obsessed with animals as a kid. And my house was basically a zoo because I would bring in stray dogs and cats and birds. And I mean, I had a little pet chicken and fish, and I mean, you name it, creepy crawlies. I would spend a lot of time up in a mango tree, looking at lizards and how they moved. So I did have this obsession, but I actually went to school to become a lawyer. I was a pre-law student, and
Okay.
I had to
Wow.
take a science class that then led me into anthropology. That's when I realized, okay, that is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, yeah, that within itself is, a wild transition. So you're in law school, and at some point you go to anthropology. Uh, do you have any? Not, I don't want to say brushback, but what's your family saying when you say, hey, I know I'm in law school, but you know what, my calling is anthropology. So how did that go over with family and friends?
Um, so yeah, no, it's funny because at the time I was also a cheerleader for the Miami Dolphins. So not exactly what you would imagine,
Which again, I was going to bring up later, but yes, that's great.
So yeah, so my friends were like, why in the world would you want to go into the jungles where you have no electricity and hair dryers and, all of the comforts? My mom thought I was gonna die. I had never left the country. I had never even been camping. She was a nurse, so she only saw like all the horrible potential things that could happen out there. But in her own Cuban mother way, she supported me because she ironed my field pants before I went off into the
Oh,
field.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So now, so being a animate Jets fan,
Uh,
um, that's been numerous times to Miami to watch the games.
mhm.
The most interesting thing I found about that stadium was the cheerleaders.
Oh,
Um,
good. Thank you.
not to go again. There's a lot of different ways I want to go with you today, but um, how did that whole thing come up? Now, are you in law school at that time, and this opportunity comes up, or is it something just that you're doing to make money? Some side money. How does that happen?
You don't really make money doing that, but
No, I know. I think it's like $100 a game or something, right?
back when I was doing it, it was like $50 a game. So that was
$50 a
definitely
game.
not the motivating factor. So I was still an undergraduate in pre-law
Mhm.
at the University of Miami, and I had always been very athletic growing up. Like I loved playing basketball and softball and all the things. I had never actually been a cheerleader, which is what's sort of funny because
That
the
is
only
funny.
reason that I went for it, not because I had some dream of becoming a cheerleader, but because I was such a huge football fan and basically really couldn't afford the tickets. And I thought, well, what
That's
better seat, right, than on the sidelines cheering on a team that I grew up with and loving. And that's how it all got started.
and again, so and again, we're going to go all over the place, but never being, because this is interesting to me as well. So never being a cheerleader or going to, cheering in high school or college. When you go for your auditions, is it like, how's that work?
It's terrifying. I didn't make my, cheerleading squad in high school, so I already was traumatized as it was. And then funny
Right.
enough, there were a couple girls from my high school who were cheerleaders also trying out. And I was like, oh yeah, like this is never gonna happen. But that's where my sort of determination and resilience really kicked in because I just honestly, I worked harder than anyone. I would be off to the corner, just going over the routines over and over and over. And they were really comfortable because it was second nature to them. And they'd be sitting and, chatting
Right.
and laughing it up. And I was like, nope. And I just kept working and working. And well, I suppose it paid off.
And like, look at Mayor over there.
I
He's
mean,
got
there was a
some
little part of me that was like, you
wanted
didn't
to
let
show
me
them
on
up.
the high school team. And yeah, and I made the Dolphins. So
Awesome. So how many years does that go?
4 years. I did it
Oh,
all the
wow.
time
All
I
right.
was an
So
undergrad. Yeah.
so you were in it. So
I
I
was
mean,
in it.
yeah, it was,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought it was one or two. I didn't realize it was four. So, I mean, that's amazing. So
Hmm.
again, kudos because, it was random and you went for it. And again, that's what I love about this podcast. That's what we tell people all the time. If you
Yeah.
want something, just go for it.
It-
Worst case, you tried and it doesn't happen. So one more question on the cheerleading, and then we'll move on. So what is that first experience? The first game of the season, your first time cheerleading. What is that like for you?
Oh my God. I will really never forget running through that tunnel and going onto
Uh-huh.
the field and just seeing the, tens of thousands of people in the stands. But what I really like to this day stays with me because it never got old. It was every game when they played the national anthem and you're looking at everyone and you're standing there and you're representing, this team. Anyway, it was just such a powerful, beautiful, also extremely terrifying, nerve-wracking feeling, but really sort of amazing.
That's amazing. That's again, with all your achievements, I guarantee you, um, that's something you'll never forget. I mean,
Oh,
that's amazing. I love that. Like I said, I had this similar situation. Um, After high school, I went to Chippendales,
mm-hmm.
and everybody was laughing at me, like, what do you know about, And I ended up doing it and did it for a while. I never stopped, even when became an NYPD officer. But back then there was no social media, so there was
And
no
you had the
problem.
real
But
costume.
what was that?
You had the real costume.
I wouldn't use that, but the point was, again, all the stuff afterwards. I'll never forget my first time on
Yeah.
stage. So again, that's why I asked you because that's an amazing, just like you said, the energy, the people, and everybody. So that's amazing. So,
Yeah, you never forget.
um, yeah. So, again, so we move on. Um, what is your first trip to somewhere like Africa or Congo? What is that like? So again,
Mhm.
you're from Miami. You've never experienced anything like that, right? Are you saying, "What am I getting myself into?" Are you excited? What is that vibe like?
So I'm super excited, very green-eyed, naive, setting off on this unbelievable adventure. My first expedition was to the Amazon, and of course, I didn't keep it simple. I went to the most remote and unexplored part of the Amazon. So I was deep in it, green abyss, impenetrable forest, hacking my way with a machete to get through it. I lived out of a dugout canoe for months. And there were moments where I had just quit being a cheerleader, right, to go do
Right.
this. There were moments that, yeah, I was homesick. And I thought back to those days where, oh boy, I could be with the girls right now, just like at the football field or
Watching Dan Marino.
watching Dan Marino. But I never for a moment sort of have regretted that decision. It was a very steep learning curve, but I looked around me and I saw like these unbelievable waterfalls and on these rivers and then looking at the monkeys overhead and I was like, yeah, this is where I want to be.
Wow. And again, I'm just going to ask you a question
Hmm.
off on target, but off target. How do you deal with the fucking bugs and the
Oh my
mosquitoes
God.
and how do you deal with that? Because like I said, I go in my yard sometimes at night and I get like two flies. I'm like, I'm going inside. So how does
It's
that work?
so annoying. I've had, I mean, I've been covered in bug bites, like head to toes, and oh God, just, it's funny because I'm a conservationist, so obviously, like, I protect animals. I don't want to harm any animals, but mosquitoes are off that. Like, I will kill any mosquito that comes near me. It's just annoying. There's these little sweat bees in Congo, for example, that they literally are like attracted to your sweat. So they get into your ears, through your eyes, like they're kind of everywhere. And they, at one point, I was completely covered in them, and I just, they were driving me nuts. But here's what happens. Then I had gorillas that had come closer, and I was watching them, and I forget all about the bugs. Like the bugs aren't even there. I'm so focused. I'm so excited to see what I'm seeing
The
in front.
adrenaline.
That was it. Like that's it. Then you forget the bugs, but they're annoying.
That's great. No, no doubt. And so again, you start doing this on a regular basis,
Mhm.
and then you become like it's the first female, right? Correspondent for
Mhm.
National Geographic.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's pretty amazing itself. I mean,
was pretty
um,
excited.
now is it how does that whole thing materialize? I mean, National Geographic, if you're into what you're doing,
Yeah,
that's
the
like
mecca.
again the Sports Illustrated of what have you. So how does that
Mhm.
come to pass? And how far into your career now doing this before this happens?
So I was in grad school, working on my PhD, and National
Mhm.
Geographic came to Madagascar where I was doing my research, and they were actually they were filming someone else, and they were filming other animals. And then the producers started asking me questions about my research and what I was doing, and became super interested in it. And the next thing I knew, I had a film crew at my field site coming to film what I'm doing because this was the first time these animals had ever been studied and actually the first time that they had even been photographed. So it was sort of a really cool story, but I thought that was going to be it. Like we did this documentary and then I would never hear from them again. And the next thing I know, they were offering me a position to not just talk about like my work, but the work of so many other people all over the world doing research on some of the most incredible animals. And I mean, that was like it was a dream I never even knew I had, but I knew that I had to take it because there aren't, even to this day, there aren't a lot of women at the televisual forefront when it comes to exploration and adventure. And, it's usually like, white khaki clad men, but to see a
Right,
woman
sure.
like waist deep in swamp, really going for it, I thought this is really cool for, for young girls and young women to say, okay, yeah, we can do this. Not to mention my past as a cheerleader, like what a great way to also send the message of you don't need to be pigeonholed or be, stay in a
Right,
box, right? Like you could do all sorts of different things. And
right.
so that was important to me.
That's amazing. And then, um, again, not to go off topic a little bit, what is the, well, 2 point question. What is the craziest, oh, let me break that one more time. What don't most people know, uh, with when they're dealing with, primates and, what is something that you would only be able to see that people don't realize? And what is
Right.
the craziest or the scariest thing that ever happened, when you were there dealing with them? So it's really a two-part
So
question,
yeah,
but
super question. I think that the adrenaline, like, so for example, being charged by a 450-pound silverback gorilla, uh,
mhm,
the adrenaline that happens in that moment, like it never goes away no matter how many times you're charged. Like the power of these animals is just kind of unbelievable. But I think the most beautiful thing that I've learned in watching primates is just how sort of caring they are, what great moms they are, how the if an old silverback is kind of in his last days, all the females will sort of slow down and wait for him, and they kind of come together as a family. And I think it's a really beautiful thing to watch that most people don't really, know about. Like these really strong family bonds is what I love. And that primates have very individual personalities. Like some are super shy, some are really funny. I mean, some are outright, bitches or mean. Like, I mean, they just have like really
right. Oh,
complex
I mean, they're
personalities,
right.
like people. Yeah.
What, right? They're like what, 1 or 2 chromosomes away from humans. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's pretty crazy. So again, it's pretty incredible that, like, again, they all have their own individual. Even, I mean, dogs, even they have their own individual personalities. I mean, I have a husky who's like
Yeah.
a diva,
Yeah.
but so much different than my dachshund. You know what I mean? Who's
Right.
like, always up on you and like a cat. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that whole thing is it's an incredible thing. You still didn't tell me what happened when the 450-pound
Oh,
silverback was chasing. How did that stop?
well,
I mean,
clearly I survived. Well,
no, you survived, but how did they stop it? How did it
well,
just?
generally they're just bluffing and they're letting you
Oh,
know like
okay,
this is my territory, and they just give you these reminders. But the scariest, let's say, animal encounter was being actually chased by a forest elephant. They're a lot faster than people think,
I don't want to laugh.
even though
That
they're
just sounds
really
funny,
big.
but
So but my scariest always are not animals, or it's humans, right? I've worked in Congo. I've worked in areas like where there's a lot of political
right.
upheaval and violence. And so I survived a plane crash in Congo. That might be
I was
top of
actually
the
going to
list.
I was going to mention that next because if he's upset, I was going to say if you survived a silverback 450-pound gorilla coming at you, how the
Yeah.
hell do you survive a plane crash? Because that's again not something most people could say, or if they were in a plane crash, or not being able to say anything. So
Yeah, exactly.
how does that happen?
So, well, I was actually, funny enough, I was just finished with this one gorilla study that I was doing, and me and a film producer and a cameraman were heading home, right? Heading out of the field. And we got on this flight, and I was sitting there writing in my journal, and I start looking out the window, and all of a sudden I noticed that the plane is starting to descend a lot earlier. Like we still had 2 more hours on this flight,
Right.
and it's a big commercial plane. I mean, this isn't like some little Cessna. And anyway, then it starts to go up again. So I thought, okay, maybe they were avoiding turbulence. But then it starts to do it again, and this time at a much more fierce velocity. And I start looking around me and I see that the stewardesses are in crash mode position, with their knees up and
Right.
and like they still haven't made an announcement, like no, but what's very now in hindsight funny about this situation is that nearly every passenger on this flight was actually a nun. And as I looked
Oh,
around
wow.
and like as I looked around the flight, they were all praying. Like every single one of them was praying. And I still to this day credit those nuns for
Absolutely.
like, saving us in this situation. But we did crash land. Plane is probably still sitting there in the middle of Congo somewhere. But we don't really know what happened. There were stories about whether the gas was siphoned. I mean, there were all sorts of stories, but it's because it happened where it happened, it's really difficult to really get a real
Right.
answer.
Real answer. Was there any, and did you get injured and was there any fatalities?
There weren't any fatalities, and
Oh, thank God.
other than, a lot of mental trauma and some PTSD after that, I wasn't physically injured. But the aftermath of that was also sort of humorous in that eventually they started sending trucks to rescue people in essence, right? Get us out of there. And people were just like jumping on the back of these pickup trucks as they started rolling in. And so eventually I jumped on the back of a pickup truck. And for the night, like there's not a lot of options of where you stay there, right? It's not like there's a Hilton on
There's
every
no
corner.
Ritz-Carlton?
No. And so I ended up spending the night at a brothel.
That's
Um,
so fun.
and remember, I'll never forget thinking I had never been so happy to smell like this cheap Chanel number 5 because it meant I was
That's
alive,
great.
but I was in a
That's great.
brothel now. So
That's
I went
great.
from gorillas to a plane crash with nuns to a brothel. I mean, it was just the most
Yeah,
surreal
that's a movie.
experience.
That is a movie right
There
there.
you go. Maybe you could like
That,
produce
man, that
this.
was my next idea, maybe, right? So I guess the moral of the story is next time I go on a
Fly with
plane,
nuns.
at least hopefully there's at least one nun
Fun.
on
Yeah,
the plane. At least one. You know what I mean?
exactly.
So that's another amazing. Again, very such an interesting life. I want to just go into the whole thing with Mark Burnett in a second. Uh, but I just have,
Mhm.
and again, this is more for my father-in-law because
Okay.
because he always fights me on this, and I try to explain to him as a filmmaker
Hmm.
that it's not as real as you think.
Right.
What is your take on Naked and Afraid?
Oh my gosh. That's also a funny story. I was approached the very first season, like before it ever
Uh-huh.
launched, about
Mhm.
appearing on it. And I remember I was on vacation with my family at like a beach vacation, and I took a Zoom call with a production company, literally in a bikini,
Right.
because I was just like, I'm on vacation, and they wanted to talk to me kind of urgently. And I
Mhm.
remember saying to the producer, you really don't want me for this show because I don't really have a lot of issue with nudity, right? I'm a mom, like I don't really care
Right.
and I'm not going to be afraid. So I'm just not going to be the right person for this show.
Right.
So I don't know they came back a couple more times and I think they finally got the message that I wasn't going to do it. I don't know much of how they, really what goes on out there.
Right.
It's difficult to say, but it's an entertaining show for sure.
No, it's definitely when it's funny. Because I just tell them, like, listen, if they're eating again, there's a cast. I mean, there's the two subjects, right?
Hmm.
That are doing this. But obviously, you have a producer, directors, you have crew. That at nighttime are going to go back. You have crafty. So you're
Right.
telling me, at no point they don't have access to, anything if they're really. So again, he really believes like, no, that's it. They're just out there in the there, and that's it. And if they, so
Well, I
that's
just
always a
say,
big so, I mean, if there's anybody to ask to use as a reference, that's why I figured let me ask because I was just that's an ongoing Sunday dinner argument we always have because they go crazy for that show. So
I love
um So moving forward now, what was
Mhm.
that?
I said, no. I said I love it.
No, so moving
Now I'm gonna
forward,
have to ask some friends who work on.
yeah, no, they love it. Oh,
Yeah.
you do? Well,
Yeah.
that's funny. So moving forward, let's talk Expedition Africa,
Mhm.
which I believe you're currently doing as
Yeah.
we speak.
I'm doing
Um,
Expedition Bigfoot right now.
oh, Expedition. Okay, so that's kind of a spin-off, right? Of this, totally different. Okay,
Completely
Sage,
different,
make note of that.
different networks,
Gotcha,
different shows, just similar titles.
gotcha, gotcha. That's why I figured it was a spin-off. So we'll fix that in editing. So you get approached by Mark Burnett, right?
Hmm.
Who's a powerhouse.
Sure.
Uh, how does he find you? What is that dialogue like? And um, was it something he pitched to you, or how does that go down?
Yeah, so Mark Burnett approached me because he was looking for four modern day explorers, who were basically the real deal because we would need to be out there for a couple months surviving
Mm,
on our own with absolutely no interaction with the crew, for example. Like no one was allowed to talk to us even as we were being mic'd. Like no one could break that fourth wall. So he needed
right,
people who actually knew what they were doing out there. And the premise of the show was for these four modern day explorers to follow in the footsteps of Henry Morton Stanley's famous search for Dr. Livingston. And
right.
so honestly, my initial gut reaction was that I didn't really want to do like a reality show because I didn't know
Mhm.
they would tell me who else was going to be on the show or basically really anything else other than that I would be there as the wildlife expert, making sure people didn't, for example, set up tents, on a hippo path and could identify snakes and all of these other things, right? And who also had a background as a survivalist and who could bear the months of just we had to source our own food. There was no, in this case, I can tell you there was no access to crafties or anything else.
Right,
Um, we were filmed 24/7. It was a very big brother in the field situation. And I just wasn't sure until he said that as part of the show, we wouldn't be given any modern day equipment. It would be in
mhm,
the same way that Henry Morton Stanley went off on his search. So a compass, a sextant, no tents. It was really pretty hardcore. And so that is the part that actually really excited me and the reason that I signed on because I had read all these amazing journals of these people and I wanted to
right,
experience it in the same way that they had. Um, but that was one of the toughest expeditions that I'd ever been on. And then of course what I should have guessed because it is at the end of the day a reality show, right? Is that
mhm,
they cast four very type A personalities. All of us had a lot of experience in the field and we had all led our own expedition. So imagine putting the four of us together to sort of work it out on this
right,
expedition,
right. Well, that's great.
right?
That's great. Yeah,
So there was a lot of in-house fighting and differences in opinions on how to do things and how to get somewhere and how to get the food, make the
right.
food, filter the water. I mean, it was just like insanity that way.
That's amazing. And again, I can do some due diligence. They actually gave you the nickname, right? The female Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I don't know when that started,
Well, again, that's
that
pretty cool. I mean, if
it
you're gonna
was
be
pretty cool. Yeah, the New York Times was like, the female Indiana Jones, and then it just like it stuck, and I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. I've been
that's
called.
yeah, I'll use that. I'll take that. I'll use that everywhere. I mean,
Yep,
that's gold. So
exactly.
so now, what we're doing today is you're doing now Expedition Bigfoot.
Correct.
So, and that is on what network?
It's on Discovery Channel and Discovery Plus.
Discovery Channel. Discovery. Now, has any seasons aired yet, or they're about to?
Yeah, we actually just finished filming season 5.
Okay,
So,
awesome. And
so
again,
season 5 will be airing very soon.
so again, what would you say is different with your show? Because again, with
Mhm.
Bigfoot, because a lot of these shows, Bigfoot's obviously, probably the biggest, I don't want to say mythical or, I don't think he's mythical. I actually think he exists, to be quite
Do
honest, if you're
you?
going to ask me. I do because I mean, there's a lot of back in the day, nobody had if you happen to see something in the 70s, 80s,
Yeah.
everybody's got cameras now, so there's a lot of footage, whether it's tapered with or not,
Mhm.
or tampered, I should say. But I think so. I mean, yes, it's weird because with all our technology, drones, this, that nobody actually ever caught one or actually, but I almost hope they don't because what would happen if they did? I mean, that poor thing would be, you know,
Yeah, there'd have
but
to be a whole
what,
lot of measures in place. Um,
yeah, what would you say your show um angle is as opposed to other shows?
sure. So what I love about our show is that is it's very grounded in science, which is not
Mhm.
really the case in a lot of the other shows. Like there's definitely um people on our show that truly believe in Bigfoot or have had experiences with Bigfoot. And I'm on the show basically to just ground it in science. So I know that there are tens of thousands of like witnesses that come forward with their stories, and I'm super open to hearing all of those. And I think like they're super brave in coming out because there's a stigma that's attached, right?
Right,
But for me, it's all about the physical evidence, and so that's what I'm there to do and collect and try to find. And so that was another show that again when I was approached, I was like, I that's not what I do. I don't know anything about Bigfoot, and like
right,
no idea. Like
right.
I mean, I've heard of the myth, the legend, but I don't know anything about it. And they said, no, that's why we want you, because we want you to take your field experience in the wild with primates and apply it here, like a real scientific investigation.
Sure,
And
sure.
so anyway, I gave it a shot, right? I said, well, let's see how this
Right.
let's see what this
Plays
is all
out.
about. And I've actually come to really love the time in the field and honestly have experienced some pretty surreal stuff and have found some, I wouldn't necessarily say evidence, but some really cool findings that, kind of make your eyebrow raise and keeps me up at night. So there's some very cool stuff out there, and it's something that I'm really enjoying.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Gun to your head, do you believe there's a Bigfoot, or do you think what would you say?
I would say that what I believe doesn't matter because it's not religion.
No, no. Again, I'm not saying. I'm curious. I'm just curious to see. I mean,
Yeah.
has there been that?
Look,
Let me redirect the. Let me change the question a little bit, make so I don't put you on the spot so much. Um, was there ever evidence scientifically
mhm.
that was so compelling that you would be like, wow, this is pretty. Did anything ever get presented to you that was so solid that you would be like, wow, you know what? Maybe there is something to this.
So I'm not at liberty to discuss the findings from
Oh, okay. All
last
right.
season. No, 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 but I'm gonna say this. Definitely have some findings now that I think like we're closer than ever before without saying too much. And
Okay.
and maybe on it, right? Like I cannot say, but what I will say is that when I first started working on this, I would kind of ignore all of the, let's call it the high strangeness that surrounds Bigfoot. And now
Right.
I'm starting to see like patterns and different things. And honestly, talking to people who have had experiences, who have a lot to lose by sharing their story. Like some of them had never even told their wives or anyone, and they're police officers, they're psychologists, like they have a lot to lose. And when you see them and hear them, like they still have that, the chills, and they get afraid that they're afraid to go back in the woods. So, is it possible? Well, sure. Like honestly, I discovered a new species not that long ago, and we make new discoveries every day.
Right.
So for me to say we know everything that's out there,
Right.
that would be actually going against everything I believe in science. Like you have to stay open-minded and be
Right.
curious. And truthfully, I think that there is a lot out there that we don't know. So is it possible? I think so.
And here's my last Bigfoot question, and then we'll
Okay.
start wrapping things up. If there is a Bigfoot, right,
Hmm.
what do you think is the biggest reason or factor that he hasn't yet been discovered? Do you think he's just in such a remote place, or what would you? I mean, just what would be your
Oh,
take from a
that's a
a
great question. No, no,
non-scientific
no.
a non-scientific?
No, but that's a great question. I think, for example, I've dedicated my whole life to studying very rare, elusive primates that had never been
Mhm.
photographed up until just a few years ago. And I
Right.
think if you're dealing with, especially if it's a primate, like it's described, a highly intelligent animal that may even have some human characteristics. Again, this is all based on description. Then they would be smart enough to know that humans are like destroying environment. Humans are killing animals
Right.
everywhere. I mean, who knows the why? But I kind of think if we're dealing with what people describe as a super intelligent being that's closely related to us or primates, then they're probably smart enough to know to stay away from humans. Basically, I think it's
Right.
as simple as that.
And you know what's funny? Before we start wrapping things up, I get a lot of interesting people I speak with, and I'm going to say you're one of the most interesting in a sense where we could have actually did five separate podcasts. Uh, Basically, no, because there's so much to talk about. I mean, again, when we're talking about, how you transition from, obviously being an attorney, transitioning over, being a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader.
Miami
Um,
Dolphins, wrong team.
I'm sorry, Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. You know what it is? There's only one team I hate more than the Dolphins, and it's the Cowboys. I'm sorry, Miami Dolphins cheerleader. That's a whole thing, especially since you were never a cheerleader, right? And then the whole thing with National Geographic, and being their first wildlife correspondent is that's awesome. And then getting approached by Mark Burnett, that's amazing. And then this whole Bigfoot. I mean, we could have had literally. I wish I had more time with you because we could have actually had a half hour on each particular thing,
We could
and
do
then
this
we'd even get
again.
into, like I said, you discovered um, a species that was never even seen before. Which again, I wanted to touch on that very quickly because I mean that's super interesting. So if you be just so kind enough to really share with us how that happened, and then we'll start
Yeah.
to wrap everything up.
Well, that's been like a highlight of my career because I never imagined I
Right.
would
That's
some
why I
of
wanted
these
to get to it.
species. Yeah. Um, World's smallest primate, and it fits in the palm of your hand. It's like about that
Mhm.
big. It weighs less than 2 ounces. And yeah, it had never been documented before, photographed, described. So I got to name it, and it really was like a dream come true in a sense for a scientist. And it's funny hearing you talk about my kind of unusual trajectory through all of these things because the one thing that is a common thread through all of them, and I think to speak to your podcast, right, which is even why I was excited to do this, is that it's all about going for it and taking risks and not letting fear decide, right? Just or what other people think decide. I mean, just that screw it, I'm going to go for it and I'm going to do it. And every single one of those cases, it was about me just going, yeah, I'm just going to do this. I don't really care what anyone else says or thinks.
And that's amazing because again, that's what truthfully what this whole podcast was created for. Where you could have went left or right, and you took the chance, and you
Yeah,
got to where you are now. Um, Before we let you go, can you just let everybody who's listening
mhm,
know how they can find you on social media and how they can follow you, and reach
sure.
out if they have any interview questions.
Yeah, you could reach me through my website, which is mireyamayor.com, Mireya Mayor, or through Instagram, which is also pretty easy. It's just at Mireya Mayor. But yeah, I'd love when people send me questions, and if they have stories to share, I'm all ears.
Awesome. Now, again, Dr. Mireya Mayor, again, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. Again, as you know,
You.
we follow each other on Instagram, so obviously, I'll be watching, and as things progress, which I know with you they probably will. I'd love to have you back on.
I would love it.
Again, if you're listening one more time, um, again, just like Maria, if you dream out loud. Don't talk shit, create shit. Um, that's if you're not inspired after this one, I don't know what would inspire you. So again, once again, we'd like to thank our producers, Sage Spielman. We would like to thank our oh my God, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Believe. And again, as always, we'd like to ask everybody out there to please leave a comment on the podcast, and we'll see you next week. And once again, if you dream out loud. Thanks for listening.